standing in this election, that's a question that I keep getting asked, not by the general public, but by the SNP. The SNP usually say to us, why are you guys bothered to stand? Leave it to us, we've got all the answers, you know, we're going to get all the votes, so you guys just sit back and let us go on with it. Well, that's not good enough for us, brothers and sisters, it's just not good enough. Because some of the things that the SNP have promised, they haven't quite delivered on yet. They seem to be backsliding a wee bit on some of their promises. And if you look at Labour, well, they're just in the doldrums now. They're finished. They just haven't realised just how bad things are for them yet. However, for the Scottish parliamentary elections, we are standing against the SNP. We are standing on the constituency list. We're standing on what we call the regional list. And if the SNP keep calling for a vote for the SNP 1 and 2, that isn't going to really do anything constructive whatsoever, because in mid-Scotland and Fife it's expected that the SNP would get 175,000 votes. Now, if that's the case, it will get divided by 10, because there's 8 constituencies in the region, and the whole method of working out the voting system is that you take the 8 regions, 8 constituencies, you add 1, then you add another one for if they've already got an MSP, which they will have on the constituency list. So that'll be 175,000 divided by 10, so they'll have 17,500 votes. So that really isn't going to do them much good, because we'd expect the Tories, their vote will remain reasonably the same. The Labour vote will crumble a bit. So who does that leave? It leaves the Greens, it leaves ourselves, Rise, and also UKIP. Now the big danger is that UKIP will get a seat in this constituency. I don't believe for a second that UKIP speaks for the people of Mid-Scotland and Fife, but by default they may well find themselves with a seat here. So what we're asking people to do is forget this stuff about vote SNP 1 and 2. It's going to be a wasted vote on the second vote. So if you vote for Solidarity, then we've got a chance of getting in and maintaining an independent stance within the Scottish Parliament. Because I think that the Scottish Parliament desperately needs the voice of the left, socialist ideas and socialist policies, which the SNP simply don't have. We're in a desperate situation. We had a recession in 2008, which the government keeps telling us we're now over and we're getting out of it. Well, I didn't notice any rise in the employment in my area. I don't notice any increase in wealth of the people that I know. All I see is food banks. You know the most feared word in Britain right now isn't it ISIS, isn't it terrorism, isn't even Trident. It's sanctions. Sanctions for the unemployed. People who are in job seekers allowance or whatever they've got nowadays, if that's still what it is. They live with like a sword of Damocles hanging over their heads, and it's sanctions. And if they do something wrong, they turn up late, through no fault of their own, they can be sanctioned like that. It depends on the mood of the person who's interviewing them. And they end up with nothing. It's an absolute disgrace. So we now have 222,000 children in Scotland who are now officially in poverty. And that is an absolute disgrace. And we're meant to be all in this together, this fighting recession and trying to get out of it. But we've got 222,000 children in Scotland who are going hungry in most cases. They're living in official poverty. That's the ones that they know about. We've got people getting sanctioned. We've got anecdotal evidence of young mothers who have been faced with a choice of feeding their kids or feeding themselves, and we all know that is no choice whatsoever. You've got young mothers that are going about fainting because they haven't eaten for 2 days or 3 days at a time. And yet at the same time, the top 1,000 people in Britain have doubled their wealth over the last 10 years. The people who got us into this situation isn't it the people who are unemployed, isn't it the immigrants, it's the bankers. And what's happened to the bankers? They've given themselves huge bonuses. So what's happened is they've carried on doing exactly the same thing that we're doing before 2008, which is getting more and more in debt. And by the way, Britain's debt is now at least £1.5 trillion. That doesn't look too good. If we were a company, it would be bankrupt. We wouldn't be allowed to trade or do anything. And so we're in a very, very bad position for when the next recession hits us, because if you listen to the economists, every one of them will tell you there's going to be another recession. It's not a question of if, it's a question of when. So when it does come, what I would say is this: we bailed the banks out the last time. They should have gone to jail, but instead the government bailed them out with our money. Well, this time the banks are going to have to bail us out. We've got to take the money from the rich and give it to the people who need it, the people who desperately need it. And that's why we need to get Solidarity MSPs elected into the Scottish Parliament. I think we should do the same as Iceland and jail the bankers. Their economy, they let their economy run right down. And now they're one of the fastest growing economies in the world. They're doing great now. But of course, they don't have the same economic strategy that our Westminster government has. And it's not just the Tories that have that strategy. Labour adopted the same strategy. That's what New Labour is all about. And that's why there is no real opposition in Westminster to the Tory government. And on top of the massive debt that we've got, and the fact that we have people on food banks, we have children starving, the government is still in debt on squandering £100 billion over the next 30 years on a weapon of mass destruction that everybody knows is never going to be used, because if it is used, then the world dies. We're all finished. So it's an absolute nonsense to have such a weapon. You know, it's just never going to get used. So why is Trident going to be replaced? It isn't for defence. It isn't a defensive weapon. It doesn't defend us against anything. It doesn't defend us against terrorist attacks, or cyber attacks. And to hear the military hierarchy, these are the main enemies at the moment. These are the main dangers right now. It doesn't defend us against anything. But what it does do, it creates a huge profit for people who invest in the arms industry. It's a great investment. Here's something that's never going to get used. It gets continually refurbished and refitted. So they're spending millions on it. There was a submarine broke down a few months ago. So they immediately, it was one of the rods, I think it was starting to leak. So they got in, and it cost £1 million just like that for one day to get this rod replaced. It was so it's a great investment, you know, if you happen to have a few million quid in your back pocket. But we're one of the richest countries on earth. That's why it's so maddening, the fact that we have people on food banks and when we have kids in poverty. Another thing that they're going to invest in or allowed to happen is fracking. Now, I'm afraid the SNP government has been lax on this. They keep giving us, we don't have the power, it's Westminster to blame. But they've put a moratorium on fracking. I don't think that's enough. I don't think that is enough at all. They should just say, we're stopping it, because the information that we're getting from behind the scenes is that this guy who has INEOS, excuse me, I can't remember his name now, I should have taken a note yet, he's got a deal to do this underwater coal gasification, which is far more dangerous. And the licences are there, just ready to be signed, but the SNP are saying, no, we'll have a moratorium, and it allows big business to say, right, okay, well, we'll do all the preparatory work, and then before we know it, it's a fait accompli. And I have a real fear that after the Scottish parliamentary elections, that's what we're going to find, that people are going to be given that. Now, not only is fracking bad for the environment, I think everybody knows it is. With the poison water, with examples that we've seen in America, we've seen it in Australia. It's bad for people's health. We've seen evidence of that in these other countries as well. But it's also bad for the economy. In America, in Wyoming, there were thousands of licenses given out to small companies which had all been set up by large companies that were just, what do you call them, satellite companies, which did some fracking in certain areas. And then once the gas ran out in that particular one, or that is, the profits ran out, then the companies just jacked it in, they went bankrupt, and so they didn't have to clear it up. So all over Wyoming, there's thousands upon thousands of these derelict fracking sites, which nobody has the power or anything or wherewithal to do anything about. They're still there. So that's what's facing Scotland in the not too distant future, unless the Scottish government really takes a hand and just stops it, just bans it once and for all. The last thing I'd like to finish on, the last thing I have to say is about the independence referendum. I'm very concerned that Nicola Sturgeon, having told us that the trigger for another referendum would be if Scotland voted to stay in Europe and the rest of the UK voted to come out of Europe, that would be the trigger, and we would have a referendum there, and everybody was happy with that. But I wasn't happy, I have to be honest. For me, the trigger was when the Westminster government voted to bomb Syria. Now, the vast majority of people in Scotland were totally opposed to that. Now, for me, we should have said that then. So we have nothing to do with this. We all said we should never have been in Iraq, an illegal war there. We should have said, that's it. We're not having anything to do with that. We're demanding another referendum. We want independence. However, she said, right, if people in Scotland, now I think it was a bit of wishful thinking on their part, thinking the people in Scotland were all wanting to stay in Europe, because a lot of the people I talk to really don't. But a lot of the people in Scotland really don't understand. A lot of the polls apparently are saying that the people in Scotland, or a majority of the people in Scotland, want to stay in Europe. I think a lot of them are saying that, a lot of the polls aren't, by the way, but whoever the people are who are saying they want to stay in Europe are probably saying that because the SNP are giving them the leadership on it and saying that that's the way they should vote. But I don't think it's a clear cut. It's going to be a clear cut decision in Scotland that we come out of Europe. So I think that reason is on thin ground. So then where do we go from there? Because they haven't given us anything else, and the SNP has hardly mentioned independence since it won the general election in Scotland. So I think I've got a great fear that the SNP are more interested in retaining power in Holyrood rather than go for independence, because they've got the power, they've got all the MPs that they can get in Westminster. What is it to fight for? I think there's serious questions to be asked of the SNP, and if we can vote to get Bill Mair elected into the Scottish Parliament, then I think he's the kind of guy who's definitely going to ask these questions. So I'll finish on that, and I'll hand you back to our chairman, Colin. Thank you.
Guys, I'd like to sum up in just a few words. We're in the age of the sound bite of politics, and hopefully what I'm going to use is I'm going to use that technique of sound biting for good, use of power for good. So if I could sum up what Solidarity is. Solidarity is a socialist party, and socialism is people before profit. And what we're seeing nowadays, and what we've been seeing for many, many years across the UK and in Scotland, is that profit before people. Socialism is putting people before profit. Socialism is anti-austerity. And I can quote Karl Marx here. I'm not as well versed as my comrades here in Marx and Lenin and Trotsky. But the one thing that I actually learned this saying before I realised who said it, and it's from each according to his ability, to each according to his need. And I thought, no, that's just a rule to live by. That's just wonderful. And then later on, when I became more interested in politics, I discovered who'd said it the first time round. So again, there's another soundbite, Karl Marx. So our aim in socialism, our aim in solidarity, again, it's very simple. It's for the rich to get poorer and the poor to get richer. Jock mentioned food banks there. We've got people in work going to food banks on the way home from work. It's absolutely scandalous. And all the time, the rich literally getting richer. The rich benefiting. and enriching themselves from this austerity. And austerity is a glib word that Cameron throws around, and it means genuine suffering. We've got comrades back in Fife who work in food banks, and they tell me horror stories that I can read in the press as well. People fainting on the way to the ESA interviews with the DWP to get their benefits, getting sanctioned, and they've chosen not to eat so they can have the bus fares and get down to the job centre in time to have their interview. It's absolutely disgusting in a country that's something like the 5th richest country in the world. I used to look at pictures of India, never been to India, but I used to look at pictures of India and watch documentaries about India, and I would see beggars, people begging in the gutter, literally begging in the gutter, with absolutely nothing, living in slums. It wouldn't be an insult to call where these people live slums. And it'd be a Bentley or a Rolls Royce or some kind of big luxury car, a BMW 7 Series would zoom by on the road a few hundred yards away, and I think, that's ridiculous. How could you have that richness, that wealth on the one hand, and this abject, desperate poverty, this dirt scrabbling poverty on the other? Like that film that made with the poor lad had to clean out the sewers. There's a reality. What was this film now? That was Welsh's one. Anyway, horrible film, but it's poor lad.
Slumdog Millionaire.
Slumdog Millionaire. It was nothing to do with Evan Welsh, I don't think. Anyway. But then, you look around this country and you read the papers and you see, my God, that's happening here. That's happening here. So that thing that I used to look at and think, what civilised country could allow that? And then these countries, India, Pakistan, they've got nuclear weapons, for goodness sake. And yet you've got people scrabbling in the gutter trying to find food. They're treated almost like animals and forced to live like animals. These are human beings, these are our comrades. You've got a nuclear weapon, you've got a space program, are you kidding me? And then I look at this country, we're exactly the bloody same. The rich and the middle classes and the privileged swanning around and everything's all perfectly fine, and David Cameron tells us we're all in it together. So solidarity is about challenging that. It's about challenging this lie of austerity. And here's a soundbite for you. Austerity blames the poor for the greed and the mistakes of the rich. And the banking crisis, I like to think of the banking crisis as one of the, it's like Paul Daniels. I used to work in theatres and I've seen Paul Daniels doing this sleight of hand. Well, here comes a sleight of hand to the banking crisis. So our money in our current accounts goes into the banks. The banks decide to gamble this money on dodgy mortgages, lending to people irresponsibly who'll never be able to pay it back. They'll lose the gamble. And we say, oh dearie me, what are we going to do? Well, I'll tell you what we'll do. The government's going to bail you out. But what that means is, they've gambled with my money, they've gambled with your money, they've gambled with our money, and who's going to bail them out? Well, we're going to bail them out. So we bail them out with that money. But the story's not finished yet. Because then as a result of this banking crisis, we've got a recession. Well, in a recession, we've got austerity. And in austerity, what that means is we've got to have cutbacks and job losses. And who pays for that? The working class again. So how many times do we keep paying for this? We've paid for it 3 times already. And we're told there is no other way. It's complete and utter nonsense. It's complete nonsense when the rich are getting richer every day. Now, solidarity is a very small party. And I want to relate this to this whole austerity thing. There's a temptation to think that as a small party, we're not going to be very effective. Well, you see, there's great benefit in being a small party. We have to ask ourselves, if there's always been more poor people than rich people, if there's always been more working class than ruling class, but we have a democracy, one man, one vote, and yet the system is set up to favour the rich, there's something going on here. There's definitely something going on here. And then we're told there is no alternative to capitalism. Socialism will never work. It's a lovely idea, but really, it's never going to work. Look at Cuba. Well, Cuba's working beautifully, actually. I've been there, I speak Spanish, and I can tell you it's working fantastically, despite the blockade. So people will tell us, the ruling classes, the media, the press will tell us, socialism would never work. A condition of socialism would never work. It's a pipe dream. What I say is, from what we just described, capitalism isn't working. There's a definite there. There's a hypothetical, socialism wouldn't work. But there's a definite, capitalism isn't working. And like that old poster that the Conservatives used to slag off Labour way back in the day, Labour isn't working, it showed you a dog queue. Well, capitalism isn't working. And that's a pun, because capitalism isn't working on any level, except for the billionaires. So, I bring back to my question, what does that got to do with Solidarity being a small party? It's very simple. The reason why George Osborne went to see the chief executive of Google and came away triumphant that he had managed to face down the chief executive of Google and force him to pay £130 million of tax, when they owe us billions of tax. For even in 1 year they would owe us a billion, but they owe us billions of back tax. Why is that? He could make so much more money forcing the rich to pay their way. You don't need to put up the top rate of tax. You just need to force these people to pay their tax, and we'd be swimming in money. So why don't they do it? They don't do it. Cameron doesn't do it. Blair didn't do it. Whoever is the leader of the Liberal Democrats, whatever they're called, wouldn't do it, because these parties are funded by the big companies. So it's not in their interest. A couple of £1 million here and there is a lot of money to the Labour Party, the Conservative Party, and it's a nice little incentive to keep the Prime Minister from your door. That's all it takes. So a couple of £1 million into the Labour Party as a donation, or even £500,000, and you can save yourself billions. Solidarity is not, never will be funded by corporations. We're anti-big business, we're anti-austerity. We're not impressed by billionaires, we're not impressed by big wealth. So there's one of our prime advantages, and that's one of the messages I want to tell people all the time. You should vote for a small party that is not in the pockets of corporations, because we're the ones that will challenge them. And another wee story about a small party. When our co-convener, Tommy Sheridan, was an MSP in 1999, he was the only MSP of this party. There was only one. Within 3 months or 6 months, let's say 6 months in case I got it wrong, within 6 months of being an MSP for the very first time, the only MSP of this party, he introduced a bill to abolish pindings of warrant sales. This is why councils used to come into your house, send in sheriff officers into your house and take all your furniture or anything they deem not essential, your telly, the lot. If you hadn't paid your council tax, your poll tax at that time, your rent, take it away and sell it down at the auction house. Ostensibly, on the surface, this was done to recover the cost of the bill that you owed the council. The reality was it was done to humiliate you, because it's very humiliating having some bullies, some thugs come into your house, steal all your stuff and then sell it off. It was done to humiliate the poor, it was done to crush your working class and to keep us in our place. Tommy had previously been to jail for opposing bailiffs, for physically standing up to bailiffs and preventing them entering into people's houses, for rioting against the poll tax, for standing up against injustice. So this is very dear to our co-convener, and he's still our co-convener. Anyway, the moral of the story, the conclusion of the story is a happy one. Because despite being the only MSP, one MSP of his party, Tommy cajoled, Tommy explained, Tommy used diplomacy, and he spoke despite the Labour Party actually whipping against this. He managed to persuade enough Labour MSPs to vote for his motion, and it became law. And now, in this country, if you owe the council money, they can't come in. They can't take your stuff. They can't humiliate you in front of your neighbours. They can't bully you. Because one MSP from the smallest party in the Scottish Parliament changed that law. Tommy drafted and presented as a private members bill the Scottish service tax. This is exciting, because what the Scottish service tax does is the Scottish service tax aims to achieve what I said about the poor getting richer and the rich getting poorer. The Scottish service tax is a replacement for the council tax. The council tax, of course, is based on rateable value of your house, what they say is the rateable value of the house. Now, we're here in Perth. So in Perth, not so far away from here, there's a big castle, Anne Brian Souta's sister lives in this castle. And it's enormous. Now, I'm going to tell you it's Band H. I've never seen this castle, I've never seen the council records, but I'm going to tell you it's Band H council tax. I don't live in Perth, but I live in a wee Band A 2-bedroom flat in Fife. So let's just say that I lived in Lethem in a wee Band A flat in Lethem here, right? I can now tell you that the differential between what I pay here in my Band A flat and Anne Drogue is a magical number 3. She pays 3 times what I pay in my council tax. Now there's a slight difference between Fife and Perth and Ross council tax, but it's negligible. I make pennies. I make a very, very low income, and I live in a very small flat, and I'm paying only 3 times what a billionaire is paying. That's never going to be fair. So what's the alternative? The alternative is you don't base it on the rateable value of your property, you base it on income. So the Scottish service tax looks at income. And the fantastic thing about this is that I'm going to update the figures. The original figures where you would be exempt, wouldn't pay anything up until £10,000. I've recalculated that from 2004-5 figures, which 2006 bill uses, to 2016. The £10,000 figure, which was used back then, where you'd be exempt, was based on someone working full-time with a minimum wage. At that time, they'd make £10,000 a year. Nowadays, they make 14,125. So I'm going to say 14,000. So here's how it works. If you earn up to £14,000 or less, you're exempt. If you earn £15,000, you will pay tax on £1,000. You pay tax on everything above your exemption at 4%. Okay? So 4% of £1,000, I'm hoping that's £40. I've got it all written down. never try, in the heat of the moment. It is. The first £14,000 on the Scottish service tax, which we want to introduce, you're exempt, you pay nothing. From 14 to 42k, you pay 4% of that money over £14,000. 4%, okay? Then it jumps. Once you're earning over 42k and up to 70, you're paying 15%. But you're only paying 15% in that bit of your income, so if you get £43,000, you pay 15% on that £1,000, 4% on the money 4 over 14, and so forth. I've got to stress this because I've seen this explained online and people jump to the conclusion, wait a minute, I'm getting charged 15% on my entire income. So I may be stressing the point, but it's a point worth always stressing. Now I'm going to give some examples here, real life examples, hypothetical examples. So in Perth and Kinross, Band A council tax is £772. So that person who's a single person living in the house on their own, a single income earner, then they're paying £40 instead of 772. If there are two people living in that house and they're both making 50k, well they're going to pay £40 each. Person number one is going to pay £40 and that partner is going to pay £40. Okay. Now, this is where it gets really exciting. Here's some sample calculations. There are two people and they're living in a dwelling that's a band D. They're living in a band D because one is making 30k and the other one's making 14k. At the moment they're paying £1,518 here in Perth and Kinross. Under the Scottish service tax they pay 640. So even when you start making something like a living wage, you're not going to get hammered. Someone else, another couple making 20k and 15k, like me, they decided to stay in a band A flat because always keep your expenses down is a wise thing. They're paying £772. Today, they will pay £280 under the Scottish service tax. I'm going to have a couple more examples before I do. The essence of the Scottish service tax is that some people will pay nothing, most people will pay less, a few people will pay the same, and a very few people will pay more. But those very few people who pay more are going to pay a lot more, that they can afford it. These people have been paying, it could be argued through no fault of their own, far too little, I thought you were going to start, you would start scribing for Jock. I thought that's great, Jock's going to start, because when you see these figures, and I'll show you later on, my printer's broken, so it's all done with the old-fashioned way, Charles Dickens style with a pen and ink. When you see these figures, it's just fantastic. Two pensioners living in a flat, living in a dwelling, they're exempt, easily. I mean, £14,000, sometimes the two pensions put together would reach £14,000, and remember, it's on individual income. So, even going up to a very privileged couple making 30k and 35k, at the moment they're paying £1,672 in Perth and Kinross. This couple making 65k between them will pay less, they'll pay £1,400. So then I wondered, at what point does it kick in? At what point do you actually start paying more? If you live in a band A, you need to earn £33,000 before you pay more. And if you're a couple, or you've got three, or however many earners there are, each person would have to earn more than £33,000 before you pay more. If you live in band B, you need to earn £42,735 before you pay more. But If you are fortunate, if you think having a lot of money is fortunate, and you've got two of you making £72,000 each, now you're really making a good lot of money. You're heading up to senior officers for the council territory here. At the moment you're paying £2,000, £316 a year in a band H, which is top of the range, top of the rate, top of the scale. 2,316. Under the Scottish service tax, you'd be paying 5,680 each, paying 11,000 between you. On an income of 144,000, you would pay 11,360.
How does that compare with what they pay now?
What they're paying right now is they're paying in a band H, they're paying £2,316 for the household. So they're paying a lot more. So there comes this point, so what I did was I gave a lot of examples where people were paying less, right up to a couple making 30k plus 35k, even then they're making less, and then I gave an example of people who started paying more. So Anne Globe, I was going to name wrong, it's Anne Globe and Brian Suter. So Anne Globe along there, she's going to be paying on her income, whatever that income is, she's going to be paying a massive amount more. And to my mind, that's exactly how it should be, and exactly how it always should have been. It fits in with our key philosophy that the rich should get poorer and the poor should get richer. And I have no sympathy whatsoever for people who make mega amounts of money having to pay more tax. And the great thing about it is we're not one of these parties that does triangulation like the Labour Party, where we seek to be all things to all men. Solidarity is for the working class. Some parties call themselves workers' parties. The problem is there's so much unemployment in this country, it's not feasible to be a workers' party. We're for the working class. But we want to create lots of employment. Now, on the individual basis, for the people watching online, for the people here today, this is good news for each of us. I'm assuming it's good news for each of us. And if you've got a lot more money than that, well, you can afford it, so it doesn't matter. So it's still good news. Think of the warm glow you'll have sharing your wealth with the rest of us. But you see, on the longer term as well, I'm not an economist. Tommy Sheridan, I mentioned earlier, he's got a degree in economics and degrees in all sorts of things. He's an economist. But this amount of basic economics I do understand. This Scottish service tax and our approach to taxation and our approach to redistribution of wealth is not just good for the working class, it's good for everybody. Ultimately, it's actually good for the super rich. And it's not a long, complicated story to explain why either. Tommy talks, and if you ever watch a video of Tommy, he'll bring it up at some point, he talks about the propensity to marginal consumption. And he says that this is the economic dictum that says if you give £10 to a rich person, that rich person bungs it in an offshore bank account free of tax, and that £10 will never be seen again in the economy. It just gets put away because that person has no need of 10 quid. If you give 10 quid to someone who is struggling, a poor person, they will spend that almost immediately in the local economy. So that money is going to circulate. They might go to the corner shop and buy some stuff, they might go to the supermarket, a takeaway, they're going to spend it immediately. So that money is going to circulate around. If you start handing out £100 here and £100 there to all the working class and all the low paid and all the poor people in Scotland, all those £100 get circulated immediately. They get spent in local shops. And when they get spent in local shops, the local shop benefits. But it doesn't stop there, because then of course they've sold all their stuff, they need to buy more. So they buy it from the wholesaler, who buys it from the factory, and then your big fat cat driving around in Bentley says, "This is super. I'm seeing a rise in sales. I'm selling more. This is fantastic." People have more money so they can buy more of my stuff. My widgets, my cameras, my camera lenses, my check shirts, whatever it may be. It's good for everybody. But ultimately, what we care about, that's a byproduct. What we care about, we're unashamedly a socialist party. We stand for the working class, we stand for the poor, we stand for people who are not paid enough, people who are not treated with the dignity that they deserve. That's who we stand for. And that's what the Scottish service tax does. It's not a catch-all, it doesn't solve all of society's problems at once. But if you think of a series of filters, this is the first filter in a series of filters to catch all this wealth which is being leached away from the working class and making its way to the ruling class. We also need to look at land reform, we also need to look at maybe some version of a mansion tax as well, not instead of. People say to me, Bill, the Scottish service tax doesn't do everything. Look, I can think of a way where this wouldn't work and some people would slip through that net. Good, we'll have an extra net to catch anyone who slips through that. If you've got I hesitate to use this as a metaphor, but I live quite close to a sewage farm, or a sewage treatment plant, I think it's a proper name for it. And in this sewage treatment plant, people put all sorts of garbage down the toilet, cotton buds and all sorts of stuff. And they have a series of filters, boom, 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 boom. And these filters get increasingly finer and finer and finer and finer and smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. And just because a cotton bud would fit through the mesh of that first filter, you don't throw that filter away because that filter is stopping the big stuff, then the smaller and the smaller and the smaller. So the Scottish service tax is a flagship sewage filter. If you think of wealth as sewage, and we're going to take it into the Scottish service tax factory, which is our sewage plant, and we can convert it into something beautiful like flowers or something. Give it to it. That's a very clear metaphor. You can tell I didn't stay up all night making that metaphor. According to the SPICE figures, which is the Scottish Parliament Information Centre figures back in 2006, the Scottish service tax would have raised then £505 million over and above what council tax was raising. If you update those figures for inflation, it comes out at £735 million more. That's not even the punchline. The punchline is, at the moment, we're getting told from councils there's an overall shortage. Every council in Scotland has shortages, job cuts, service cuts, and if you add all those shortages together across the whole country, it's £350 million. Well, here's your knockout punch. The Scottish service tax, as well as being fairer and helping society in so many ways and helping the working class, would more than double wipe out the shortfall councils have across the whole of the country. And even that's not a knockout punch. Here's a knockout punch. I said that Tommy introduced his bill in 2006 and it got voted down. The following year, the SNP introduced a bill which you could hardly get a cigarette paper between what Tommy had introduced under his party and what the SNP introduced. And here's the real knockout punch. If it's UFC, the guy's now down on the ground and he's going to get his face smacked against the canvas. This is a knockout punch right now. Nicola Sturgeon recently came up with this fantastic hodgepodge of ideas, which he says, I'm going to tweak a little bit the income tax, I'm going to do something to the top rate of council tax, and I'm going to fix all the problems that we've got. And I thought, my goodness, this is interesting, because I'm so excited about Scottish service tax. I read this in the newspaper, and I got to the end of the article. Nicola Sturgeon, by her own figures, and you know, she's no reason to downplay her figures. She claims that her system is going to generate £100 million more. So I thought to myself, wait a minute, you know all about the Scottish service tax because it was tabled in 2006, you introduced your own version in 2007, we've been banging on about it ever since then and we still are. You've introduced something instead of just going back and saying, actually that's a good idea, let's bloody well do it. You've come up with this incredibly complex hodgepodge, and by your own admission, Nicola, if you're watching, right? By your own admission, we've got a shortfall of 350 million, and your plan is going to generate 100 million. Now, I'm not a mathematician, but I'm not even going to give him a punchline. No to the Islamophobic Prevent programme, no to homophobia, no to prejudice and bigotry of all kinds. Refugees are welcome in Scotland. Socialism is internationalism. Now friends, anti-austerity and anti-oppression are like two very close sisters, or two very close brothers, if you like. Because this anti-oppression, what that means, this sets out to counter the narrative and the rhetoric that we read in the press, where we're told there's not enough money to go around, there's not enough council houses, there's not enough schools, there's not enough doctors, not enough nurses, it must be the fault of all these bloody refugees, for example. Or it must be the fault of all these so-called benefit scroungers, or it must be the fault of all these people with disabilities who are pretending that they're not able to work. Or it's the fault of whatever, the list goes on. Anti-oppression is a very blunt, crude tool used by the ruling class to get us arguing amongst ourselves. For the very simple reason that if we're arguing amongst ourselves and I'm blaming you and you're blaming him and he's blaming her, what that means is none of us are looking up there to Anne Globe and all the billionaires and saying, wait a minute, When was the last time you paid some tax? Wait a minute, how much more tax do you pay than me? Only 3 times? But the differential between our income is thousands. You make thousands much more than I do, and you're only paying 3 times the tax. If we were all asking that question, and if we were demanding answers to that question from our politicians, then that would be the day of reckoning for them. So what do? Do you know the biblical story of the Tower of Babel? I once studied for the ministry, guys, so watch out. Way back in the day in the Old Testament, the book of Genesis, all the people of the earth spoke the same language. And they said amongst themselves, let us build a tower to heaven, and then we'll be able to go to heaven and meet God. And God looked down and he said, what will we do? If we do not stop these people, they'll build a tower to heaven and we'll stop them. And what God did was, this was the introduction of all the languages in the world. He made everybody speak a different language. And all the unity went out the window. All the solidarity went out the window. Everybody was at odds with one another. Now, the ruling classes don't quite have the ability to make us all speak different languages, but they can categorise us. She's gay. He's a refugee. He's a migrant. He's English. And anti-English racism, I have to say, friends, is a virulent form of subtle racism which I stand against wholeheartedly. Racism, homophobia, Islamophobia, all this stuff is playing on our natural instinct to fear something that's different and exacerbating it so that we all blame each other for austerity. When austerity, as Jock has pointed out, as I pointed out, is the mistakes and the greed of the rich. So we stand in solidarity for complete equality of all people, no matter where you're from, no matter your sexuality, no matter your religion, no matter you've got freedom of belief. Anti-oppression is tied into anti-austerity. The only thing we need to worry about, the only thing we need to be focusing on, is a solidarity of the working class standing foursquare against interests of the rich, against interests of fat cat politicians, against interests of billionaires. Thank you.